The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back for another week of nerdiness here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio, joined at the moment by just Mike in the studio. Mike, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. Again, another big period of news for us.
No question. Obviously, today's episode is mostly going to focus on the Royal Rumble, and we'll start talking about the Royal Rumble match itself and the premium live event in segment 2 of the show. But we had some more breaking news. I mean, we've already recorded a bonus podcast this week talking about the Netflix acquisition of Monday Night Raw. We've got some more news to talk about. A couple of things I want to get in off the top before we get to the serious topics. Number one, we have a store now with the Nerdcast Empire. If you go to our website at nerdcastempire.com, there's a link right at the top that says store. You click on there, you can buy all kinds of merch. We had some merch this week. Added a whole bunch more merch. We've ordered some of it. Some of it's come in already. It looks really good. So excited to see that grow. nerdcastempire.com/store. The other thing that I wanted to kind of just tease a little bit is we're going to be increasing our content on the Nerdcast Empire in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be adding some more weekly shows. They're going to be shorter shows, kind of in the neighborhood of maybe 30 minutes or less. But we really want to cover more of our topic areas. I feel like sometimes on these weekend shows, we get focused in on wrestling maybe a little too much. So we want to make sure music and anime and video games all get covered on top of whatever else might fall into those areas. So those will be starting in a couple of weeks. So look for that wherever you get your podcasts on the Nerdcast Empire. But we're going to get to some news, and then we're going to talk Royal Rumble from the second segment on. Of course, the big news came out earlier this week. In fact, it was Thursday that Vince McMahon was being sued due to some sexual transgressions accused by a former employee Janelle Grant, involved in a lot of really seedy stuff. And obviously you can go on to the Wall Street Journal. You can go on to the court records, which they're all very easily available to read the details if that's something you want to do. My guess is if you're a wrestling fan, you've probably heard quite a few of the details at this point. So that came out on Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, McMahon issued a denial, promised to fight the allegations, really cast a cloud over everything that's been going on with WWE. It's been very positive news. And obviously that's not the big focus. The big focus obviously is what has been done allegedly and what's going to come out from that. But on Friday, I believe it was morning or afternoon, sometime early in the day, Slim Jim, who's a big advertiser with WWE, announced they were pausing their advertising, which included advertising on the Royal Rumble event. And I know that we talked a little bit at that point that, okay, things are going to start moving quickly, because when you start losing advertisers, that's when things start to get serious. Sure enough, during SmackDown on Friday night, McMahon announced that he was resigning as TKO executive chairman, and then on the TKO board of directors will no longer have a role with TKO or WWE. Then, of course, Saturday morning, Slim Jim announced they were, quote, re-entering the Royal Rumble following McMahon's departure.
That should make them the favorite to win the Royal Rumble, I would think.
I would think so. Like, hey, you're giving us a whole bunch of money. You can be number 30. You can get it. You can win both Royal Rumble matches if you'd want. But obviously a whirlwind, 48 to 72 hours, crazy time. I think it was something, maybe not specifically this, but I think everybody knew something was still coming down the pipeline, because TKO in a lot of their filings stated that stock price could be affected by having Vince McMahon on our board due to potential negative consequences. So they knew that this was possible. My understanding is he's still under federal investigation for something that was related to interviews that he had a few months ago. So there could even be more news. Who knows? Even maybe before this podcast drops. You just never know. It's kind of the way it's worked this week. But Mike, your general thoughts on everything that's happened over the last 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah. And I don't know for sure if this was the case, but I'm under the assumption the investigation was going on before even the merger, the acquisition occurred. So clearly when that all came about, it was like, let's try to get this guy as far out here away from everything as humanly possible without just outright saying we need to somehow force you out of here, because clearly they weren't able to do that. It's interesting. And I mentioned it a little earlier. For someone like McMahon, I mean, obviously these are all allegations. We can't say that all this definitively happened, but for somebody who has been on the radar of every agency possible to try to take this man down. You think you'd lay a lot lower and not do anything that might even begin to rouse suspicion. It's crazy to me.
And the amazing thing is, and maybe it's not even amazing, it might be more indicative of kind of the way these things go, especially when you have the money to hire good lawyers to defend yourself. He's beat a lot of these allegations. Of course, they had the tax evasion and steroid trials and things like that. Somehow he escaped pretty much unharmed from all of those. A lot of other allegations over the years that either just kind of went away, kind of like the Ric Flair thing. Everybody knew they happened, but nobody really did anything about it. And now you get to this thing and potentially, who knows, other things that could be coming down the pike. And yeah, I mean, it's the story about the professional athletes that gets busted for DUI. And you just think, you've got millions and millions of dollars to literally hire somebody to drive you around and make sure that doesn't happen. You're Vince McMahon. If you just know you're a problem, you need to hire somebody that's just a lot tougher than you, just walks around and says, no, don't do this.
Well, and honestly, if not to get too deep into the allegations themselves, but man, it's the future. If you really are into some weird stuff, you can probably pay someone who would consensually do any kind of bizarre thing you're into.
And the key to that, of course, is to not have that person working for you, because that's when it becomes a problem. It's, what you do in your own bedroom should be nobody's business but yours until they're your employee and they can't really get out. And I've heard some just outrageous takes about, well, why didn't she just quit? And it's a lot easier to look from the outside in and say, oh, sure. But I mean,
it was my understanding she was in pretty dire straits in need of a job when all of this began.
Yeah, which is typically how those things happen, allegedly. Is this typically somebody who really needs the job that gets a really good job? Because I'm sure most of those WWE jobs, if you're working somewhat closely with Vince McMahon, you're probably making a good chunk of money. It's not something you can just quit. I mean, I have days where I'm frustrated with my job and then I get a paycheck, twice a month and say, my job's not too bad. And I don't have anything like this going on. It's just irritations with, coworkers. It's not anything illegal. It's, sometimes people just think, well, you just quit. Well, it's not that easy. You got bills to pay. You got a life to live.
I mean, there's that. And if I remember reading correctly, there was a sense of like, hey, if you become a problem, you're in trouble. Like, we're going to make your life miserable, essentially, allegedly.
Well, and the other thing that came of it, too, is obviously there was NDAs involved. And supposedly the reason this came to the forefront, again, we'll know more as this continues to be reported on, is that he had made one of the NDA payments of $1 million and then just didn't make the other payments, decided that was enough. And, I mean, obviously NDAs do not cover illegal activity. So there was always a chance that this was going to come back anyway. But if you're going to try to get away with something, allegedly, with an NDA, you probably should meet the terms of whatever that agreement was. Otherwise, there's not really much you can say, especially when there were screenshots of text messages. I mean, that's not good.
Again, Vince is a very old man. I don't know if maybe the technology side of it escaped him and he didn't consider that. I don't know, but not that. I mean, you can always second guess and say, hey, we should have known something like this was going on. But there is something to be said for someone who books himself into this Kiss My Ass club in the 1990s and early 2000s, whenever exactly that was. Clearly, you like making people uncomfortable and doing weird things. So maybe we should have, thought about things a little more back then. And
I think the other thing, too, that's becoming really obvious is why Stephanie was like, peace out when he came back, and why Shane was like, because Shane is Shane. He's out there, too, but not in the same way. He's just a different cat. But he even decided, like, look, I don't want to be around this anymore, because clearly he must have known that his dad was doing things that he didn't want to be associated with. And then, of course, the whole Brock Lesnar angle with him potentially maybe being involved. And then you see why Lesnar got upset the first time Vince went away, because, well, at the very least, even if there was nothing illegal that happened with Lesnar, he had a very close relationship with Vince McMahon. Sure. I think that's very clear based on the allegations here.
And at the very least, if Vince goes down, who knows what comes out about you, even if it was only, he wasn't physically involved, even if it was just something in the works or videos being sent to him or whatnot, that's still something you have to deal with. And I don't think you want to be in that position.
No, not when you're married, especially. So be curious to see how that all shakes out. But and a lot of Vince's guys are gone. John Laurinaitis, who was also mentioned in the lawsuit, has long since left the company, and rightfully so, just for the things we know he did. Kevin Dunn, who's not mentioned in this at all, but was a very close Vince confidant, is out. There are probably a few more. Someone like Bruce Pritchard, I know his name came up in a tweet from Ronda Rousey today, basically saying that as long as Pritchard's still around, Vince is still running the company because he's still been running things by Vince even after Vince is gone. So we'll have to see what comes of that situation. I mean, for the most part, Pritchard has seemed to kind of steer clear of all the drama, and he's just keeping his head down, doing his job, at least from a public standpoint.
But I don't think it's been a secret that they all have at some point in time talked to Vince about what's going on product wise, even if they don't take his advice or follow his direction. They didn't make it seem like they just cut him off completely.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. But it sounds like maybe we're headed toward that now. Vince is not involved, and doesn't sound like, because of the way it's structured now with TKO and his shares, even though he still has a bunch of shares, doesn't really have the ability to do what he did with WWE and force his way back into the board and bring his people back in. It would take a minor miracle at this point for him to be involved in a complete exoneration on charges. And then you have to convince Endeavor that he's even worth the risk at this point. And honestly, if he hasn't been doing anything in the day-to-day operation of WWE, which is something they were quick to say even before he resigned, what's the incentive to even bring him back in any capacity and take a chance that the next thing's going to come down the road and you're going to have to deal with that then?
And I think that's the interesting difference now than his prior legal woes, is that back then he was always the biggest fish around. Now he's not even close. He's not on the same level as management in TKO or Endeavor. Those are some big deal people that he's working with.
And the one thing that we've talked about a lot with the Netflix deal, but I think it came up even with the Vince situation, is how big a deal Nick Khan has been to get through everything that WWE has gone through, the highs and lows of just this week. You move Raw to Netflix for $5 billion. You bring on The Rock to the TKO board. You have to deal with Vince being Vince, potentially, allegedly. And then he resigns, and you kind of have to keep things rolling along. And that's, that guy clearly is the guy made for this job. Yeah. And I don't know where they would be if they hadn't brought him on board at some point.
Yeah, clearly they needed some sort of backup and someone that can be that guy. And every interaction you see with him, whether it be on the Pat McAfee show or anywhere else, he always comes off like he has his crap together. Like he's witty, he's sharp. I just nothing but impressed by the guy.
Yeah, so we'll see how all this shakes out. And obviously, we didn't record an emergency podcast on this one because honestly, the news was still kind of trickling out, and I figured we would see more. And honestly, again, by the time this podcast airs, there could be even more revelations or more news break from
He might
this.
win the Royal Rumble. You never know.
You never know. Anything can happen in the WWE.
He's going to throw Hogan over the top.
Hogan and Slim
29 and 30. Yeah.
So we'll see how that all shakes out. But that is pretty much the situation with Vince McMahon. We wanted to kind of get that at the beginning of the show just to kind of talk about what this is before we come back and record the rest of the show, just to, to kind of let everybody in behind the curtain. We are recording this before we watch the Royal Rumble. So we will return on the other side of this break, having watched the Royal Rumble and seeing how it goes. I think we're very excited for how the event is going to be.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we're just as excited on the other side of this commercial break as we are right now. But that's the Vince McMahon news, the TKO news, certainly a lot of real world news involved in the world of professional wrestling this week. We're going to step aside. We come back. We are going to talk about the Royal Rumble pay-per-view premium live event, and we'll see how it all shakes out. We'll do that on the other side of this timeout here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, we are moving on to the Royal Rumble itself. And tonight was one of the biggest premium live events of the year for the WWE. Really sets the tone for the upcoming road to WrestleMania, or is it the roads to WrestleMania, as Cody Rhodes becomes the fourth man in history to win back-to-back Royal Rumble matches. With me again, as was in segment one, is Mike. Mike, good to chat with you again.
Great to be back.
And joining us across the table is Rachel. Rachel, how's it going?
It's good. It's good. I'm glad to be here.
And joining us from Parts Unknown, as always, is Chris. Chris, how's everything going out your way?
Pretty good. I was invited to be an entrant in the Rumble, but the plane tickets from Parts Unknown are too expensive, so I just watched it.
Outrageous to fly out of Parts Unknown in January. And you think after the holidays it's a little better, but really just tough time to get a plane ticket. But we're glad to have you here. It's glad to have you here for this podcast, and we're going to be talking the Royal Rumble in these last two segments. And we'll start with the men's Royal Rumble match. It was the main event of this card. The match itself went for 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 15 seconds. And Cody Rhodes, who drew the number 15, was the winner of the Royal Rumble match, eliminating CM Punk after about 10 minutes or so of Punk and Rhodes being the final two in the match. Just a couple of quick highlights of the match, and then I'll turn it over to my guests to be able to give their thoughts on it. Uso started out 1 and 2. That had kind of been rumored all day. Jey Uso lasting about 50 minutes before being eliminated by Gunther, while Jimmy Uso was eliminated by Braun Breaker, who certainly had a very impressive time in the Rumble match. We saw the return of Andrade from wherever he was for the last 3 years, just disappeared and reappeared. Great to see him back. Certainly had a nice run in the Rumble. He was eliminated by Bronson Reed about 27 minutes in. You continue on through the match. Obviously, we saw some interaction between Bobby Lashley's group and Karrion Kross's group that caused some eliminations in the early part, maybe about a third of the way through the match. Then Cody Rhodes came into the match at 15. We got Gunther at 18. Braun Breaker came in at 20. Certainly impressive. Omos at 21. Then Pat McAfee entered the match at 22 after kind of crap talking people in the ring. And then his music played. I think everybody kind of thinks that was probably Brock Lesnar's spot. McAfee decided he didn't want any part of that and eliminated himself. R-Truth, who entered his second Royal Rumble of the night, came in at 24 and helped inadvertently eliminate JD McDonough, who was still laying on the ground after being speared by Braun Breaker. Truth would be eliminated by Damian Priest a little bit later on. Punk came in at 27. Drew McIntyre, 29. Sami Zayn was number 30. I think everybody held their breath thinking it might be The Rock, or who knows who might be that last spot. It ended up being Sami Zayn. He was in it for about 4 minutes before being eliminated by Drew McIntyre. Finally came down, as I mentioned, to the final four, which was Gunther, McIntyre, Punk, and Cody Rhodes. The two heels ended up being the first two out. A really good 10-minute segment between Punk and Cody. And then it's Cody Rhodes who will have another chance to finish the story, getting the win at just under an hour and 10 minutes. Let's start with Mike. Mike, what are your thoughts of the men's Royal Rumble match?
It was thoroughly entertaining. Maybe not as I don't want to say not as interesting as the women's, but I think it was more by the book than the women's was. Obviously, you're probably planning on having the Usos wrestle each other again down the road. So having them start out made all the sense in the world. You want them to be in the ring together. Might as well do it right off the bat. Good to see Andrade back. As Triple H said in the press conference, that maybe before it wasn't the right time for whatever reason. Now it is the right time. So clearly they must have some plans for the guy moving forward. Breaker looked crazy impressive, which I'm not surprised at all. Coming down to the end, I'm a little surprised on one hand that they actually had Rhodes and CM Punk as the last two, just out of fear that you're going to get a lot of heat on the one who eliminates the other. But after their promo on Monday, I guess they really thought they needed these two guys to face off one-on-one in the ring. Might as well do it at the end of the Rumble. Kind of surprised they had Cody win again, but cool that they had both the champions up in like the luxury boxes where he could actually just state that he was going after Reigns at the end of the show. But yeah, I mean, quality Rumble.
And certainly Cody, some great comments after in the press conference where DDP was in there, got to ask him the first question and, basically talk about what that area had meant to Cody. And you can see Cody getting emotional, and obviously he gets emotional a lot. That's kind of his thing. But I thought it was funny in the post-match press conference that he'd also seen all the memes, and we've seen all the memes, and we've seen all the rumors, and some of it WWE kind of did to themselves where they put a lot of doubt in everybody's mind. How is it really going to end? Was The Rock going to come swooping in out of Hollywood and come in and enter at 30 and win the Royal Rumble and, delay the story or whatever it might be? I mean, you had people convinced that might be what was going to happen up until today, honestly. Rachel, your thoughts on how it all went down?
I picked Cody in my predictions to win, but really it was kind of half-hearted because I didn't know what they were going to do. I could have seen The Rock coming in. I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. And I mean, obviously CM Punk would have been a great choice too. The match overall, R-Truth is just, everyone needs to protect R-Truth forever, because him trying to tag into the match and Dominic's trying to get out of the move and he just wants R-Truth to help him. So finally he tags him in because that's what R-Truth wanted. And it was the first time we've ever seen a hot tag in the Royal Rumble. I'm glad Cody won. That's what I was pulling for. Andrade had a good reaction. Like Mike said, it was good to see him back. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm glad it's decided. Cody's going to go against Reigns. It was a good match, solid match.
It certainly, I think a lot of people will be happy to see, that Cody's going to have, it appears, that opportunity to face Reigns on second night of WrestleMania once again. Chris, want to get your thoughts. Obviously, the three of us here all watched it together, so we kind of bounce things off during, but it's always good to kind of talk to somebody that watched it on their own, see what your perspectives might have been. So what did you think of the Men's Royal Rumble match?
I was kind of left wanting more. I don't know if it's because I was so entertained by the women's match that opened up the show, or I can't really say. I kind of hoped for more returns. I mean, we did get Andrade back, which was nice. I felt like while it was entertaining, I mean, you spent so much time on kind of the Pat McAfee eliminating himself, going up and over the ropes 2 different times. The R-Truth stuff, while entertaining, obviously that's not a whole lot of wrestling going on there while they're waiting on a hot tag. But I mean, it did what it needed to do. I do like that they're at least staying consistent. I picked Cody to win on this one on our sheets because I felt like Triple H or the booking department as of late has really not wanted to give these returning wrestlers their flowers immediately. So it didn't much make sense for Cody to be on this big run, wanting to finish his story. And then as soon as CM Punk gets his first match, he wins the Rumble. Glad they didn't go that route. So I definitely think it would have been worse if they had. All in all, I mean, it wasn't the worst Rumble by any means to me. I mean, especially when the 2012 one exists, but I would have liked to see more.
I think, first off, I think this was maybe one of the first years of the Women's Rumble was clearly the better Rumble of the two. And having gone first, I think you do feel like maybe it's going to be hard for the Men's Rumble to live up. And secondly, I think sometimes logical booking does sometimes make for more boring booking because it is what's supposed to happen. But I would always prefer that to a swerve, just a swerve. I feel like that was Vince Russo type booking where, hey, everybody knows we're going to go this way, but we're going to go this way just to surprise people. Like, you can do that every so often. I mean, obviously, I think Cody losing at WrestleMania was an example of that, where everybody was sure he was going to win the title, and then he didn't. And then Brock Lesnar attacked him, and everybody thought the world was coming to an end. And we turned out we got a great feud between those two, and Cody's stronger than ever, and his support's stronger than ever, and he's going to be in some random dude's wedding, and he's giving away broken tables and Christmas trees. And it's like Triple H mentioned, Mike, afterward, is you could just see, like, Cody's already the face of this company. He's the guy that, if you need a guy to represent WWE in 2024, you're going to send Cody Rhodes out there.
Yeah. I think the concern, though, and what we felt last year is anytime you feel like Vince is handing you off to Brock Lesnar, it's probably a bad thing.
Well, that's true. That's true, as we found out. But I do agree to some degree with Chris's sentiment. It wasn't a bad Rumble. I think all the storylines that were in the match made a ton of sense and sets things up. We mentioned the Final Testament and Bobby Lashley's group, the Pride, having their interactions. You had a lot of Judgment Day interactions with groups they've been feuding with. Nothing felt illogical. Maybe it was a little bit boring and paint by numbers, but it was all logical. So it's like, if it's going to be boring, it needs to at least make sense. And I feel like that's the best way to describe that Rumble, is it made sense.
It definitely made sense. And maybe I wouldn't be so harsh on it if maybe we got a little. I know we had Carmelo Hayes and Braun Breaker, who both looked amazing, especially Braun. But maybe if we had taken some of these folks like a Kaiser, or maybe obviously Pat McAfee, take them out and put a couple more NXT guys on there, and get them featured. That's one thing that I felt the women's match really did great was just, I mean, we had someone from TNA in there, just all the featured wrestlers, and they all look so strong. So I feel like if we would have done a little trade off with some of those more entertaining, less wrestling focused moments and brought in some of these younger talent on, you know, a pay-per-view where they kind of get free reign to just hop in and wrestle with the big dogs, I think I might not be so harsh on it.
I think that's a reasonable take. Now, I will say, and Rachel, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Had Triple H known what kind of pop Trick Williams was going to get on SmackDown last night, I wonder if they would have called an audible and put him in the match, because when he came out to save Carmelo Hayes, it was a loud chant, whoop that Trick. I mean, that dude is insanely over already.
Oh, yeah. I think if he would have known now what he didn't know then, yeah, I think they would have easily put Trick Williams in the match. He even had some interaction with him and Carmelo with their storyline. I think that would have been really good. But yeah, I think Trick would have been a great addition to the Royal Rumble.
And, you know, somebody like Ilya Dragunov, who has a ton of character, not in the match tonight, obviously makes sense because he's got a title defense in a week. So if you're, again, thinking booking logically, it doesn't make sense from a logic standpoint to have Dragunov or Trick Williams in this event, because they should be getting ready for the NXT pay-per-view, which comes up next week. Again, it all made sense. And again, you know, if the choice is between maybe a little bit of excitement, but it doesn't make sense, and boring, but logical, most of the time I'm going to choose boring and logical. But again, I thought the end was good. I thought the thing I enjoyed the most, and we'll get Mike's thoughts on this, CM Punk, again, showed his value in that situation because, of course, he got a big pop when he came out. Most of the match worked as a babyface. When he got into the last 10 minutes with Cody, he was a heel. He showed you, like, you know, I'm not going to lose to Dusty's kid. I didn't sit out 10 years to lose to Dusty's kid. The ultimate heel line at the end before he gets eliminated, acting cocky, you know, just all those things that he's so good at, that he basically just a subtle change, not antagonizing the crowd or anything like that, just to be able to know that that's the thing that was going to help Cody get put over even more by winning the match.
Yeah, I think CM Punk as a heel always works. And I think in this situation specifically, it's great because he's a guy who was at the top of the mountain in WWE. He's a guy that chose to leave WWE. Not that they didn't want him around. He just wanted to walk away. Not because he wasn't being pushed, but because he was just disenfranchised with the whole thing. So he should see himself a little above where Cody is and think, you know, how dare you think that you're ready for this? You know, it makes all the sense in the world. Going back to kind of the difference between the men's and the women's, I think you kind of set a weird precedent. And I know they did it last year as well, but when you do invite someone from TNA into your Rumble on the women's side, and that's the first match, I think there's kind of that built-in expectation that you're going to see something kind of like that on the men's side. Why not? It's the same company. Why don't you have a Moose or, you know, any number of TNA wrestlers just pop in, get an invitation into the Rumble, hang out 15 minutes, they're gone, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, someone like Josh Alexander would make a ton of sense. You know, Alex Hammerstone is still, I think, technically a free agent. He's still kind of out there.
That would have been really cool.
That's a guy that's, you know, again, the indie fans that are going to go to the Royal Rumble are going to know who this is, and they're going to pop for it. I agree. I think that's...
And Eddie Edwards would be really cool, considering how long he's been around.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, they've had a relationship in the past with, like, the guys from the Motor City Machine Guns. You know, bringing one of them in and putting them in the match would make a ton of sense. Alex Shelley has had a very good singles run of late, in fact. So, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. But yeah, I think that's also something that kind of hurt it.
And, you know, I understand the urge to want to ask Triple H questions about the lawsuit situation. But to me, the more interesting question from a wrestling standpoint is, where do you see those kind of agreements going forward? Like, is that something we're going to see more regularly? You kind of mentioned when the chance presents itself pursuing it, but can that become a more regular thing?
I think Jordan Grace even mentioned on social media it wasn't going to be the last time you see TNA. So maybe there's going to be some more crossover there. But that was the men's Royal Rumble match. Cody Rhodes, again, yeah, he may have pointed at the WrestleMania sign, but it was the point to the Roman Reigns box that basically told you where the story's going over the next couple months. We still got 70 days to WrestleMania, so obviously there could be some twists and turns before we get there, but certainly it looks like Cody's going to get another shot to see if he can finish the story at WrestleMania in Philadelphia. We're going to step aside here on the Nerdcast Empire. In our final segment, we're going to talk about the 2 non-Royal Rumble matches tonight. And then we're going to talk about the Women's Royal Rumble match, which honestly I think may have been match of the night. We're going to talk about that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, talking Royal Rumble with everybody on the crew tonight. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We now have a store on the Nerdcast Empire website, and we have put a ton of items on there. And a big thanks to Chris and his friends for suggesting some items. We have put them up on the website. You can buy them, and they will ship them directly to you. If you have ideas for items that you'd like to see on the Nerdcast Empire, if you'd like to see us sell them on our store, reach out to us, social media. Find one of us, send a carrier pigeon, whatever is necessary to get us the message. Let us know, and we'll see if we can put it up on the store at the Nerdcast Empire. Talking Royal Rumble, and Chris, I wanted to throw it to you real quick because you brought up a interesting stat during the break about the Men's Rumble before we move on. So I wanted to give you a chance to mention that on the podcast.
Yeah, so while I was doing my research for our picks on the pro wrestling cards, I noticed that CM Punk and Cody Rhodes were actually both in the top 10 as far as cumulative eliminations for the men's matches. They were tied at 18, so they were both number 10 on the list. After this match, not just overcoming CM Punk in the match itself, but Cody Rhodes got more eliminations with his 4, putting him up to 22 total cumulative eliminations. CM Punk with 2. Bringing him up to 20. So now on that list, Cody Rhodes sits at 9, CM Punk at 10, and they both knock out Chris Jericho, who had 19.
So, yeah, interesting stat there. And as you told us during the break, nobody above those 2 were active in the match tonight. So certainly a chance for those 2 to continue to rack up the eliminations in future matches. Certainly an interesting stat. We're going to talk briefly about the 2 matches in between. There was only a 4-match card, which turned out to be a smart move because we sit here at 1:18 in the morning recording this podcast. We certainly didn't want it to be any longer, but really not a whole lot to say about these 2 matches. Logan Paul defeated Kevin Owens by disqualification in 13:53 when Owens got caught using the brass knucks because he was too dumb to throw it off his hand. You think for a guy who has been a heel for a lot of his career, he would be better at hiding the brass knuckles instead of leaving them on his hand. But I will say it is a creative finish. It was well shot by the camera. They had the right angle in the corner that was able to see the referee look up, see his hand. Like, they're already making big strides in their production because that was just really well done. But the only thing I can say about this, honestly, is that it appears that this could be setting up those 2 to wrestle again, possibly at WrestleMania, maybe in Perth, somewhere down the line. But otherwise, it was just fine. I thought there was a segment where they did the outside interference bit with one of his lackeys that went on way too long. I don't know if somebody was missing a time cue, if it took Waller and Theory time to get down there or something, but something just seemed off about that whole exchange. But I'll throw it to Chris first for your quick thoughts on Logan Paul and Kevin Owens.
Yeah, like you said, that exchange seemed very awkward and just kind of set it off for me. I honestly probably would have just preferred something like his brother, Jake Paul, hopping in at some point, which I imagine, as it looks like this feud's going to continue, that's probably going to be something that happens down the road, is his brother's going to get involved. One of those matches that we already kind of knew the outcome. I mean, I hope down the road we get to continue this match with Kevin Owens and he actually earns the United States Championship. Owens is just kind of a guy that I feel like most people always want him to see come out on top as far as a championship goes. I feel like he's put in a lot of time, and especially with the United States title in the past, I'd like to see him go even above that. But yeah, hopefully this ends in a good way. This match just kind of did what it needed to do tonight.
Yeah, and I thought it was odd to choose a disqualification ending when you only have 2 non-wrestler or Royal Rumble matches. It's weird that one of them ends with a non-finish, especially when the other one's going to be basically an anything goes match. And I thought it was odd that if they are going to continue this, why not just have Logan Paul get disqualified? And then it really gives Owens a legitimate reason to want a rematch. I thought that was odd. But Rachel, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, I pretty much agree with. I thought it made Kevin Owens look like silly to leave the brass knucks on his hand. I do think it's going to probably lead to a rematch. I think, like you said, I think the one segment went too long with his lackeys. yeah, I mean, it was what it needed to be. And I mean, it was a good match overall, but just goofy ending, just silly antics.
What was Logan Paul tearing up at the end there, by the way?
Was that a cough drop?
They talked about
Yeah.
cough drops.
He was opening up a pack of cough drops. Yeah.
Yeah, only for Owens to come over and get one.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what the meaning of that spot was. It was just kind of weird. But a lot of things about this match seemed kind of strange. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I realize that I'll never be in that like demographic of Logan Paul fans because I never know who any of his lackeys are. It's like, hey, it's some guy. Guess I should know that guy. Cool. And I understand that millions and millions of people know that dude because Logan Paul's just, for whatever reason, ridiculously popular. His work as a wrestler, though, has been phenomenal. Great heel. Everybody hates him. I think we're in a situation right now with Kevin Owens where he's among a group of wrestlers who you feel like at one point in time could have been the guy to beat Reigns and wasn't. And because of that, you still want to see them doing meaningful work, especially coming into WrestleMania. Even though the Owens and Zayn tag title win last year was a great moment, it still felt like a consolation prize in some ways. So you don't want to see them drift off into obscurity when we're finally getting around to finishing this Reigns story.
And I think it was one of the questions that came up at the end with Triple H in the post match is you got a ton of talent that are main event guys. Like, how do you keep them on top of the card and keep them relevant? Because it's not easy. You've got to write good, compelling stories to get people to continue to care about them when they're not wrestling for anything. And I think like sometimes companies lean too hard and having too many titles instead of just trying to do it with storytelling. So we'll see how they do with that. We'll see if that issue continues on as we move forward. The other one, and really this is the last, we're saving this for last other than the Women's Rumble because it was exactly what we thought it would be. Roman Reigns wins the Fatal 4-Way. Kind of a neat spot at the end with it appearing that AJ Styles was going to go for the phenomenal forearm, but ended up getting bumped off the top rope, rolled into the ring, ate a spear, 1, 2, 3. Obviously, you had bloodline nonsense, as you would expect, with Solo Sikoa. But it was a little bit of a different finish, a little bit different book match. But in the end, it's Roman Reigns wins. Again, based on what happened in the Men's Rumble, it makes a ton of sense because clearly we're headed to Reigns and Rhodes again. Rachel, your thoughts on this one? I
mean, I don't think anyone really had any reason to believe that Roman was going to lose. I mean, people would have loved to see, LA Knight, who's one of the biggest stars on the roster, win, but there was just no way. No, there was no way. Not with Roman, not with obviously Cody. We all figured he would eventually get to finish the story against Roman. AJ Styles' spot at the end, I thought he got hurt. Like, I thought he had botched the move. It was so weirdly timed, but it worked out. It was perfectly done. It was an entertaining match overall. No big surprises, obviously, but AJ Styles, that just blew my mind.
Let's throw it to our resident LA Knight fan, Chris. The one thing we can say is that LA Knight did not eat the pin, as so many of us predicted tonight. I kind of figured that would be what they would do, but it ended up being Styles that ate the pin. So that kind of keeps Knight strong in a match that I think everybody knew Reigns was going to win. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, that was definitely what I was going to mention. And I refuse to speak on whether or not I thought or guessed that LA Knight was going to eat the pin on our scorecards.
We can look that up.
But I'm definitely happy that he didn't. And can I just say that, like, AJ Styles, I still can't get over. Like, he is so cut, he could make a diamond blush. Like, my God. And I'm excited to see where this goes. I think that's my current issue right now is, you kind of knew that Roman Reigns had to keep the championship because of other storylines that are leading toward WrestleMania. But now where do the pieces fall for AJ Styles, Randy Orton, and LA Knight? Because you have some guys that are in amazing shape and can put on some shows, but what are they fighting for now that they've all just been kind of thrown out simultaneously from the group here? Still an interesting match. Fatal 4-Ways and matches like that usually are. I'm still frustrated with that table not breaking. I mean, how many bodies do we have to throw at that thing to bust it? I'm supposed to believe that 3 different people being thrown on top isn't going to break it, but Logan Paul's frail body is going to bust it wide open. But yeah, I mean, I'd say it had a lot higher stakes than the Kevin Owens Logan Paul match did, so it had that going for it. But in the same vein as the other championship match, it was kind of predictable as far as the outcome. It was just how we were going to get there.
I should point out, because we haven't yet, that Rachel won the pick'em tonight on Pro Wrestling Scorecards,
Woohoo.
including our added on unscheduled appearances that I had to create a document for because Pro Wrestling Scorecards is too busy on a cruise ship to actually do their job. You know, again, it's not really a whole lot to say about this. Mike, your thoughts on Reigns doing what we expected?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. One being, we know obviously Reigns is going to take the title into WrestleMania, and it's been that way now for 3 years. So we could do pretty much a top 10 list of the dumbest ways he's retained the title. And this wouldn't be anywhere near this. This was actually pretty creative. The top rope didn't break, or,
It wasn't handcuffed to a scaffold for more than 10
like a minute and a half on a last man standing match.
Yeah.
There were a lot of worse finishes than this one. And correct me if I'm wrong, the ending involved Reigns reversing the blunt force trauma.
Yeah.
And Knight running into the rope, knocking Styles. So basically, you can make the case that LA Knight cost AJ Styles the title there.
So I could certainly see those two having an issue. I mean, AJ's kind of in a mood right now.
Yeah, and he clearly doesn't like LA Knight specifically. So I think that's where you're going to go from there.
That would certainly be a very interesting match. And they have, a shared history, even if it wasn't at the same time necessarily, with both of them coming from TNA.
You haven't seen the last of TNA.
That's true. Yeah, maybe we'll see some more things with that. But yeah, Reigns wins, and obviously with Cody winning, I think that makes that a little easier to swallow. We're going to talk about the women's Rumble match to wrap up this week's edition of the Nerdcast Empire. And honestly, it was I think it was the best women's Rumble match they've had. And it's one of the better Rumble matches of any gender in a while. I thought it was really well done. And
Gender wasn't there.
They hindered Gender.
Yeah, Jinder Mahal was not.
I had him on my list too.
Yeah, he's got a new t-shirt. Don't hinder Gender. And then they hindered him by not putting him in the men's Rumble match. So here's your t-shirt.
How does R-Truth qualify and not Jinder Mahal?
He qualified to be in 2 matches.
Someone asked Tony Khan about that. Like, what are the qualification requirements for the Royal Rumble?
How many wins? How many losses?
Tony Khan's too busy replying to Triple H, talking about the stupid and silly door
name. Yeah.
He's not wrong. Once you've done it once, it's no longer a forbidden door.
Correct.
Yeah, it is goofy.
But anyway, to the Royal Rumble women's match, and the deserved winner was Bayley, winning in 1 hour and 4 minutes and 55 seconds. She breaks the longest in a Royal Rumble women's match, breaking the record that Naomi actually set in the same match, making it 1 hour and 2 minutes before being eliminated by Jade Cargill. Really a phenomenal match. You start with 2 veterans in the ring with Natalya and Naomi. Makes a ton of sense. Naomi gets the big pop on the comeback. Bayley comes in next. She's in there with a couple of veterans, as she mentioned afterwards. Certainly grateful for that. Jordynne Grace, the current TNA Knockouts champion, comes in at number 5, had an excellent showing, had several face-to-face interactions with people that you'd like to see her have full matches with, including with Bianca Belair, who ended up being the one to eliminate her finally at 25-minute mark. You had Asuka coming in at 7. Then Ivy Nile, Katana Chance. Bianca Belair comes in at 10. She makes it all the way to 1 hour and 2 minutes before she's eliminated. And then you have just, I would say fillers, but it's everybody kind of had their moment. Kairi Sane, Tegan Nox, Caden Carter was next. Chelsea Green was incredibly entertaining. They teased the spot where she was going to get eliminated quickly. Then they teased the spot where Piper Niven caught her and pretended like she was going to drop her. And like, no, I'm just kidding. And then she took so much abuse in her time in the match. Entertainingly, finally eliminated by Becky Lynch. Niven, of course, came in right after Chelsea Green. Really only 2 people in the match that I thought, probably maybe didn't need to be in the match. Xia Li is just fine, but, just doesn't seem to have any direction. And Maxine Dupree's clearly not ready to be at this level. She's a comedy relief character, and honestly, she's not even that funny. So I thought there was really, to me, she was the one person in the match that they could have done without, and it would have been fine. Nia Jax came in at 19. Jax has been really good in this run. I know people don't want to hear that, but she's done a great job. She's certainly slimmed down quite a bit and had the most eliminations in the match. Certainly was a very big threat. Becky Lynch comes in at 21, was eliminated by Jade Cargill at 1 hour and 2 minutes. Then we had Shayna Baszler. Then we had R-Truth, who thought he was supposed to come in. Valhalla came in instead. Valhalla was eliminated in the distraction, so I imagine we're going to get R-Truth versus Ivar on Raw Monday night. Meechin comes in at 25, Zoe Stark, Roxanne Perez, and then Jade Cargill, who got a huge ovation. Looked like a star. They treated her like a star. She was finally eliminated by Liv Morgan in 1 hour and 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Tiffany Stratton came in at 29, also looked great, got eliminated by Bayley, and then Liv Morgan, who was the final person eliminated in 1 hour and 4 minutes and 55 seconds by Bayley to get the win. This is one of those, again, Maxine Dupree aside, because to me, she was the one person that just didn't seem to fit in the match, although she did have kind of an entertaining spot with the Caterpillar. I thought everybody else that was in the match, maybe not Valhalla because she was in it for like 2 seconds, but I thought everybody looked good. I thought they made them look good. I thought it was interesting. They gave Jordan Grace a ton of respect, both in the match and post-match. It was just really well put together. The interactions made a ton of sense. Again, it set a bar that the men's match just didn't live up to. And we'll start with Mike again. I thought this was about as good as you can do it. And I think it's the best women's Royal Rumble match they've had.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It didn't require one of those like mid-match resets where you had someone like a Ripley just decimate everybody. It felt like it was fluid the entire time. The way the commentary put over Jordan Grace was really impressive. It's like someone they don't really even have to have in the Rumble, and they bring her in and treat her like a star. And in the match itself, she had several just ridiculous spots. You just got to think that when the day comes, she wants to join WWE. There's that door already, undoubtedly. I thought it was a little weird how they kind of treated some of the tag team wrestlers. I mean, they were some among the first eliminated. When you look at like Indy Hartwell and Candice LeRae, they seem like they were gone super fast. Natalya, Tegan Knox, Kairi Sane, Asuka. I feel like they just got them out of the way fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Tiffany Stratton always looks amazing. She's certainly ready for the big stage. Roxanne Perez is the same. Chelsea Green, just endless entertainment value. Her and Piper Niven have been tremendous in their run. And obviously the correct winner. I think Bayley's always in some ways felt like the lesser of the 4 horsewomen, and I don't know why. And I think Triple H even kind of made that point clear during the press conference. She's just a workhorse. She's someone you can always count on, and I think it's time that they kind of re-put her in that top echelon.
There were a handful of people that carried WWE during the pandemic when there were no fans in there, something that Triple H also talked about during the post-match press conference. Bayley was one of them. Her interactions with Michael Cole, all of that stuff was at a time where the program could have been unwatchable, and she deserves a ton of credit. And I feel like this is her finally getting her flowers. And of course, unlike with the men's, where there really is no intrigue about who the men's champion is going to face, there's a ton of intrigue now because Bayley and Rhea Ripley is a main event level match. That is a match that could main event night 1 because that's 2 huge stars. But the more interesting story is Bayley and Io Sky because there's been so much tension within Damage Control and what's going to happen there. One other quick point, and I'll throw it to Chris next. You mentioned the tag teams. That feels to me, and I would have to go back and watch some old men's Royal Rumble matches. That feels like a throwback to maybe older men's Royal Rumble matches where you have tag team wrestlers in and they don't stick around till they come in. They do a couple things. They're gone because they're not competing for singles titles unless there's a case where you have a tag team splitting up and you need to elevate one of them. It felt very old school, which I kind of appreciate, And
I think when you compare it to the men's, where there were very few tag team participants even in the match,
they just had a brawl basically outside. And so that, you didn't have Ciampa or Gargano,
right? They weren't there. You had Kaiser, but he's kind of been a singles act kind of recently anyway.
Yeah. So I think that's, kind of both of them dealt with it in a certain way. I throw it to Chris, and I think, curious to get your thoughts. But again, I'm really impressed with the way they put this whole match together.
Absolutely. And you kind of already touched on it, but it was like everybody got their spot and it felt very fluid as opposed to the men's where there seemed to be a lot of just dead air. And I mean, a lot of people got their spots outside of just the usual, you're going to run in and you're going to get to do some of your moves as soon as you show up. And then you're just filling time after that. I think Candice LeRae, as soon as she hit early on, she hit kind of a backstabber, fell backward onto another competitor at the same time. And even though it was kind of in slow motion, absolutely loved that spot. And from there, it was just fantastic. Jordan Grace, They allowed her to wrestle for over 11 minutes, and I had never heard of her. First time, I've never really watched TNA, and I was blown away, not just at her physique, but wrestling in general. And she didn't eliminate anybody, but she didn't have to. She just put on an absolute show and just manhandled in the best of ways. Jade Cargill, same thing. I mean, as much as I don't much care for Nia Jax, you almost have to have her eliminate that many people so that Jade Cargill comes out and is the one to take her out. It immediately puts her over. And honestly, a lot of these, NXT, TNA, and unbranded folks that arrived, I was more excited for the show that they were putting on than, say, some of the bigger names like your Becky Lynch's that were showing up and whatnot. So it's sad that the rest of the pay-per-view didn't live up to the bar that this match set. But at the same time, going back to what I talked about on my best of 2023, I absolutely love that not only are we to a point where the women's division gets their own Royal Rumble, but that I can say that it was the best match of the night and that their matches are in competition for the best match of the year, and that I actually care about their championship. Like this is fantastic. And I think this is a great example of that.
100%. I mean, it has come so far. And, the one thing we haven't mentioned yet, and I'll throw it to Rachel, there were no legends in the women's match. It's the first time I can remember in a women's Royal Rumble match, and obviously haven't been a ton of them at this point, but where they haven't had to fill it out with former greats. And I think Mike mentioned while we were watching this live, some of that I think was because it was a chance for them to say, hey, I got to be in a Royal Rumble. They had to wrestle in a time in WWE where they weren't taken seriously, and a lot of times they were just eye candy, and a lot of these women were great wrestlers outside of the company, so they got that moment. But at the same time, there was also a time where WWE hadn't built enough talent to build a true Royal Rumble match with the people that are in the house. And they absolutely did that tonight. And there were still women that we mentioned that weren't even in the match that could have been in the match. So again, Rachel, your thoughts? Because again, I feel like there's everything they've done with the women, main roster, NXT, they've come so far, and it sets up what was a great Rumble match.
Well, even Bayley mentioned it in the post-match conference that they have such a stacked roster that they didn't need the legends to come this time. I mean, they still, like you even said a second ago, there's more women that could have been in the match that you didn't need. Trish Stratus, you didn't need Lita, you didn't need Jacqueline or any of those from the past, or Michelle McCool. And it was Bayley's time. Bayley. And I know Mike mentioned it too. I've always felt like she's been the most underrated 4-horsewoman. Initially, I kind of felt like it was Becky Lynch until she became the man, because she was the one that didn't have like the NXT title. But then since being on the main roster, Bayley's just been forgotten. And Triple H mentioned it too, that people forget how good Bayley is, because you had like the Charlottes, the Sasha Banks, and Becky Lynch got so big. It was beyond Bayley's time. I can't wait to see. I mean, I have an idea who she's going to pick. Jade Cargill lifting up Nia Jax like she was a feather. That blew my mind. And yeah, seeing Jordynne Grace in the match was great. Seeing Naomi's reaction to getting such a big pop was really heartwarming, and it's good to see her back. R-Truth, again, he's a legend. We protect him at all costs. He's fantastic. And remembering that Shayna Baszler's a beast. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like they need to go back to that, because she is so good and she's so strong, and she should just be decimating the women's roster, and she kind of gets left behind a lot.
And hopefully 2024 is the year that we see Baszler becoming the killer she was in NXT. But, Mike, the one thing we mentioned watching it live tonight, and it's important to point out, this is a women's Royal Rumble match that did not have Rhea Ripley, who is probably the best women's wrestler in the world today. Did not have Charlotte Flair, who is injured with an ACL injury, and is if Rhea Ripley's not the best women's wrestler in the world, Charlotte Flair is certainly in the running for that. And yet you still put on this match that, I mean, it's not just us. I mean, if you look around online, like, the praise is overwhelming for this match. It's amazing how far they've come.
It is. And to me, it feels like they still have some sort of chip on their shoulder where they're constantly out to prove, hey, our women can do this better than anybody else. Anytime they talk about, whatever next hot free agent woman out there is going to go to AEW, you just think like, that's fine. But WWE doesn't need anybody else right now. They're fine where they are. They can basically take a pay-per-view, fill a third of it up with women's wrestling, and it doesn't seem weird. Whereas maybe other companies, you might get a match or two at best.
Well, and let's not forget that Julia, who's considered one of the best women's wrestlers in the world, is in all likelihood headed to WWE sometime very soon. So their stacked roster is only going to get more stacked. And it's crazy the amount of talent. Again, there's so much talent in NXT that was not on this card that could have also been in these matches. I know there were a few names mentioned that were alternates in case something happened. They need somebody to go in, and just impressive. I think we've all complimented it heavily, but I just can't say enough about the job they did. So it's time for final thoughts on the Royal Rumble match and the Royal Rumble pay-per-view premium live event. And we'll start in parts unknown with Chris. Chris, your overall thoughts on the Royal Rumble as a premium live event and kind of where we go from here.
Like I said, I feel like they could have done better, and maybe it's just because the women's match set such a high bar. But we are getting closer to WrestleMania, and though I may not have gotten to see a return of Ken Shamrock in the men's or a return of Victoria in the women's match, we are that much closer to completing the story. Finally, well, maybe wrapping up this bloodline story. And I'd say the biggest takeaway from this for me is I got to be introduced to Jordynne Grace, and the amount of female wrestlers that I'm already contemplating matches that she could potentially have down the road. I mean, a Jordynne Grace for a title match, versus Rhea Ripley. I can't wait.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. And that's just a message to everybody out there. Watch TNA Impact. Like, those guys have been killing it for a while, men and women. And they have a really good women's division also. And you see, a couple byproducts of that. Obviously, she just won the title off of Naomi before Naomi left. Trinity, of course, as she went under in TNA. So it was cool to see them have their moment, and then they slug it out. But it was, again, just can't agree more, and excited to see where we go. Rachel, your final thoughts on the Royal Rumble.
I'm very excited that Bayley gets her flowers finally. I also, it couldn't even function the last 10 minutes of the men's Royal Rumble match because I was so anxious on whether or not Cody was actually going to win, because it really could have gone either way. But I was so excited. I mean, I think I even yelled when he won. So yeah, I'm ready for him to finish the story. I hope it happens this year.
I think we all do, just to move on and see what's next with everybody, to be honest with you. Mike, your final thoughts?
Card was fine from top to bottom. I mean, maybe not the most extravagant or, super exciting results, but it's what you expected. It was cool that they were able to have two finalists in the men's Rumble where you're like, I'd be okay with either one of those. Mm-hmm. Not, wait, that guy just eliminated the person I wanted. They better not let him win. Glad we didn't see The Rock, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, product's still hot. Let's see what happens as we head towards WrestleMania.
And hopefully everybody else can keep their nose clean and keep anything from potentially derailing the more positive momentum from WWE. And certainly we'll see how that all shakes down in the days and weeks to come. But that's going to wrap things up for this week on the Nerdcast Empire. Huge thanks to everybody, especially staying up late on a Saturday night, early Sunday morning to get this podcast finished up. And huge thanks to Stove Leg Media. Really excited about things to come with Stove Leg Media. Had a great chance to talk with Nate this week. Certainly going to be continuing to do new things. Again, as I mentioned in the open, you're going to be seeing more content from the Nerdcast Empire, some more short type podcasts during the week, starting in a couple of weeks, to kind of spread things out so that we can cover all of our topic areas more consistently and allow us to maybe go back up in the iTunes rankings, or the Apple Podcast rankings. At one point, we were the number 14 ranked anime and manga podcast in the nation, or in the world, I guess.
Boyhood dream has come true.
Yes, I don't know how that happened, but we'd love to get back there again. So we're going to keep pushing for that. But thank you to everybody who listened. Again, check out nerdcastempire.com for our store. And of course, you can listen to our podcast there. And these podcasts will continue to drop each and every Sunday. You may start seeing some more midweek content as well. That's going to wrap things up for the entire crew. I am Matt, saying we will see you 1 week from tonight, next Sunday night, for the next edition of the Nerdcast Empire. And until then, join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.